Hello everyone. Now we will going to have a discussion on the chemistry paper 5 of BSc 5th semester of Coimbatore University. The present session is session number 25. Here we will have a discussion on the advantages of powder metallurgy, influence of carbon, manganese, nickel, chromium, tungsten, silicon and cobalt on the properties of steel. In our previous session, we had a detailed discussion on the preparation of alloys by two methods, that is electrode deposition method and powder metallurgy method, and we have given few examples for these two methods, and we have discussed the advantages of these two methods. And the objectives of present session is to understand the powder metallurgy and to learn the influence of carbon, manganese, nickel, chromium, tungsten, silicon and cobalt on the properties of steel. And the outcome of the present session is the students can understand the advantages of powder metallurgy, and one can learn the influence of various elements on the properties of steel. First, let us look at the advantages of powder metallurgy. The first advantage is, by this method, you can prepare various types of alloys, composites, and we can study the properties associated with these alloys and composites prepared from the powder metallurgy. And other advantage is the refractory materials can be prepared by using this process by mixing metals and non-metals, and their properties can be understood. And this method is of very economical when you prepare in large scale, and it has a long-term reliability by close control of the dimensions and the physical properties of the materials to be prepared by this method. And you can have a wide latitude of shape, design and complex shapes can be prepared by using the powder metallurgy method. And a very good material utilization and cleaner and quieter operation in this process of powder metallurgy. Now let us see the various elements that influence the properties of steel. First element, let us look at the carbon, how it influences the property of steel. Carbon content basically increases the hardness and strength, and it improves the hardenability of the steel. But at the same time, the carbon also increases the brittleness and reduces the weldability because of its tendency to form martenstein. So any steel in the 0.35 to 1.86% of carbon content range can harden using a heat quench temper cycle. Next is the influence of manganese on the properties of steel. Manganese can also increases the hardenability just like carbon, but here manganese can increases the tensile strength of steel to a lesser extent when compared to carbon. It helps to reduce the part distortion in case of steel. It is used to produce very fine grain size of the steel material. Manganese is used to provide the quench cracking, to avoid the quench cracking, uh, which causes corrosion in case of the material. So therefore manganese can avoid the cracking. To gain the toughness and to achieve the better wear resistance, manganese can be used, and it improves the hot hardness of steel. It is used to achieve the better corrosion resistance. So manganese has large number of advantages. Then let us see what are the advantages or what are the influences of the nickel on the properties of steel. It increases the strength of the steel, and it also increases the toughness. It increases the toughness at low temperatures when added in a small quantities. It also increases the elastic limit of steel. Nickel, when added to steel, increases its density and hardness. It improves the resistance to oxidation and corrosion of steel. It also improves the abrasive resistance of steel. It increases the heat and rust resistance of the steel. And the addition of nickel in steel decreases the value of distortion at the time of quenching. Then the influence of chromium on the properties of steel are, the chromium is very important metal, just like carbon and manganese. Here the chromium can increase the hardenability of steel. It improves the corrosion resistance of steel in the oxidizing media. Its presence in some steels could cause excessive hardness and cracking in the adjacent to welds. Stainless steels may contain in excess of 12% of chromium. The influence of tungsten on the properties of steel, it can added to improve the cutting efficiency and hardness and speed of the tools. Because of its high melting temperature, it can be used to increase the melting temperature of the steel for the industrial purposes. The high hardness of tungsten can also increase the wear resistance of steel. Tungsten can also improve the corrosion resistance, and the amount of tungsten in all alloy steels can range widely. Next is the influence of silicon on the properties of steel. It helps to purify the iron ore during the smelting process by the oxidizing it and removing the other impurities. So silicon is very important element that can used to purify the steel during the deoxidizing process. Silicon can also have an effect on the mechanical properties of steel. It can be used to increase the strength and hardenability of steels. It can increase the magnetic properties of steel. And the next element which influence the properties of steel is the cobalt. It increases the strength, hardness of the steel. It permits the higher quenching temperature for steel for several applications in industries. It increases the red hardness of high speed steel. It also intensifies the individual effects of other major elements in more complex steels. The overall session summary can be given like this. The advantages of powder metallurgy are, in powder metallurgy we have wide choice of preparations of alloys, composites, and we can study their associated properties, and it is very economical in large scale preparations, and it has a wide latitude of shapes. Design and complex shapes can be obtained by this method, and various elements like carbon, manganese, nickel, chromium, tungsten, and silicon, cobalt can influence the properties of steel, particularly in increasing the hardness of steel and in increasing the quenching, the cracking of the steel, and in increase the quench temperature of the steel. Now let us look at few multiple choice questions. Uh, the complex shaped materials can be achieved by one of the following methods. Option A, electroplating. Option B, powder metallurgy. Option C, hydrometallurgy. Option D, pyrometallurgy. The answer is powder metallurgy. In order to eliminate the machining operations, powder metallurgy relies the ability to form complex shapes. The second question is, dash increases the elastic limit of steel. The options are nickel, silicon, carbon, and cobalt. The option is nickel. In the presence of 2 to 5% of nickel in steel, it contributes the greater ductility and increases the elastic limit of steel. And the third question is, tungsten can be used to increase the dash of steel. A, weldability. B, elasticity. C, melting temperature. D, boiling temperature. And the answer is the melting temperature. Because tungsten can be used to increase the melting temperature of steel by shifting the eutectic point to lower carbon concentrations. The next question is, dash increases the magnetic properties of steel. Options are carbon, nickel, tungsten, and silicon. The option is silicon. It increases the hysteresis losses and reduces the magnetic permeability and increases the magnetic property. So you can go through these references: Advanced Inorganic Chemistry by Cotton and Wilkinson, Textbook of Industrial Chemistry by V.K. Sharma, and Modern Aspects of Inorganic Chemistry by Emilius and Sharp. Thank you for watching this video.